also been a strong advocate to those that are meeting time for energy efficiency, broadband, and telemedicine, with particular emphasis on how these sectors can serve, lift, and help create greater access and equality in rural areas. So that's particularly of interest to this group here today. And I will say too, you've been a friend of mine, a personal supporter of VSET since the inception. We would not have the Vermont Seed Capital Fund, but for Peter's efforts as well. And really a hearty welcome here to this merry band of entrepreneurs, self-employed. We have sectors that range from Internet of Things to telemedicine. And I think Phoebe up here she's on my top left screen, just give a wave. She'll run us through sort of the agenda here, but we were hoping that if you had a few sort of general remarks to maybe tell us what the heck's going on, and if we can smile at anything, that would be awesome too. So thank you for joining us. And oh, I think you're on mute here. Yeah.
Well, thanks for being with us. And thanks for all you're doing. You know, it's just reflecting on it. There's the good news here is that all of us are sustaining ourselves because of the example of other people who are somehow trying to hang in. Everyone, this requires such an extraordinary adjustment. And, you know, I feel, just on a personal level, I feel very lucky. My family's fine. And, you know, I have a job where I can interact with people like you as when I'm on the clock, and you know, so there's good health here. And of course, in Vermont, I think Governor Scott's doing a tremendous job on the health side aspect of this, where we have the lowest infection rate in the country. But I also am always just humbled. I was at Vermont Food Bank today. And there's so many people that have lost their jobs. They lost their employer-sponsored health care. They're having hassles trying to get on to new health care. And they're worried about their kids going to school. And it's not just about doing homework. And then they don't have good internet to be able to do it. And they're food insecure. I mean, there's a lot of hardship there that we're all aware of. And the big challenge for me is to make sure it's not invisible, because we have to be doing everything we can to get the infection rate down. But we also have to really be mindful of how this COVID crisis has really put, from my perspective, in the sharp relief, the absence in this country of the basic social insurance programs that a society needs when bad things happen through no fault of anyone. And obviously that's a healthcare system that works. It's family and medical leave that works. And it clearly is internet. I mean, you all have figured out, you know, you're in locations, I'm sure, because it's essential that you get high-speed internet. But everybody needs that. You just have to have it. And it really it's something I'd been arguing before COVID. Many of us in rural areas have. But with COVID, obviously, you can't get educated. Your kids need it. You can't do your work unless you have high-speed internet. And in many cases, you can't get medical assistance unless you have it. You know, when we started on this, it was quite stunning, because it's a once-in-a-100-year event, this pandemic. And it was back in March. And I remember we were debating one of the first relief packages, and thank goodness we passed that. And there was a moment of bipartisan cooperation there, where Senator McConnell and Speaker Pelosi were on the same page, and we passed that $2.2 trillion act. It did have some money for broadband in it, some for childcare, some for healthcare, you know, the payroll protection plan that helped a number of our small businesses. The problem now is that cooperation seems to have evaporated, and of course we're 3 weeks from an election. In my view, it's really obviously a really crucial election about how we're going to proceed and whether we're going to be able to give the top-down focus in Washington from the executive branch on doing things like Governor Scott is doing here to really focus on dealing with the healthcare challenge, but also whether we're then going to be able to start focusing on practical policies that obviously include the internet and some of these social insurance programs, and it also includes addressing climate change. And every single one of these things that we have to acknowledge as a challenge and we have to face, you guys are in the middle of it. Because obviously technology and apps and insight and innovation is all going to be crucial to get integrated into our ability in a practical way to address many of the challenges we face. Now, I'm going to be very interested in hearing from you about how things are going, because what's happened with COVID is that it's created some significant opportunities for some businesses. And the more power to any of you who come up with something that can help us get through this, and it has a significant job creating and economic benefit to it. But for lots and lots of business, of course, COVID has just been a collapse in revenues. I mean, our hospitality industry, some of the older sectors have really been hammered. So, my view is that it's my job to do every single thing I can to try to help get the resources back to Vermont and the policies back to Vermont that are going to help Vermonters be successful. And what's been so exciting to me about my ongoing relationship with David and occasionally stopping in and meeting some of you is to see the extraordinary creative energy and practical energy that's focused on doing real things that make a real difference. And, it's not within my grasp or in my experience. There's a real generational issue here, but those who are not as fluid with the modern internet and the opportunities that are there can certainly appreciate A, the necessity that we take advantage of the technology, and B, that we take advantage of the energy of many of the people on this Zoom call to apply that energy to problem solving. So David, let me stop there, but I do want to thank you very much. And I want to thank all who are on the call. And Fauna Hurley from my office is on here. So anything we can do that requires follow-up, we're going to be taking notes, and we want to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And Fauna, if you could drop your email into the chat at some point too, that would be a good way for folks to follow up. So, hey, Phoebe, do you want to take it over and
Yeah.
people could do an intro if you want, and then we'll get to a couple entrepreneurs that want to share some of their company stories before we have a general Q&A.
Yeah, so we have 3 VSET member companies to share kind of what they've been going through the past 6 months or so, starting with Stacy Huffstetler of Widget Brain. Stacy, if you want to unmute yourself, and certainly can.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess it is now. So I'm Stacy from Widget Brain. Widget Brain is an international tech startup. Essentially, we focus on AI, and in particular, AI for workforce optimization. So we work with lots of folks in the retail, the hospitality, distribution, grocery, et cetera, business to help them figure out how to really get the most out of their workforce. So like historically, within the world of labor optimization, labor employees were thought of a cost base. So they were thought of a cost to minimize. And what we're really trying to do with our technology is take that conversation out of just the finance channel and bring in kind of operations and bring in HR and say, well, sure, employees are a cost, but they're also an asset. Like if you run a retail store, you need employees to sell goods. If you run a distribution center, you need employees to hit your SLAs. And then also employees are people. And so how do we create schedules that balance all 3 of these competing demands and do it efficiently across really big organizations? It's kind of our focus. What we see is that a lot of our customers find opportunities to both increased revenue, so sell more, produce more, improve customer and employee satisfaction, while also reducing costs. And so we basically summarize that as more efficient schedules. We have had a really interesting trajectory through COVID, I think. We have offices here in Vermont. So Vermont is our US headquarters, in the Netherlands, and also in Australia. And so we've seen the impacts of COVID in all three places. We've seen the government recovery programs in all three places. And, we started the year 2020 saying like, we're going to really focus on retail and hospitality. And in March, we said that was a terrible plan. So we really quickly kind of pivoted and said, who else needs, because retail, hospitality, as you alluded to, have been really hurt by COVID. And so we kind of pivoted and figured out who is growing. And so we did a lot this year with call centers and distribution centers and warehousing and childcare, healthcare as well, really big. So we for sure saw a large impact in March, April, May timeframe. I think Europe had a nice recovery this summer. The US has been a little bit slower, but we are seeing folks come back, even in retail. Hospitality, still nobody, but even in retail, some folks are starting to come back. So I think we're quite optimistic about the future, although it's been a really hard summer, for sure.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Next, we have Ethan Bechtel from OMD. Ethan, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah. So thank you, Congressman Welch, for
Ethan,
being here. So I'm the CEO and founder of a company called OMD, and we now are a telemedicine company, although I don't know that I would have called us that in January or February of this year. We had been building for the last 4 years a patient experience platform that just eliminated friction and made conversations between patients and their care really easy, because we think if patients have access, if they can ask a question of a care team or a provider, they're going to be healthier because of it. It's the lack of access that drives people to the emergency room. And so beginning of this year, we were on a great trajectory, and February came and we realized that some of our practices were using essentially think of it as texting, our texting platform with patients, and they were using it in ways we had never imagined. So we started talking to our customers to get a better sense for what they were doing. And essentially what was happening was patients that had been traveling internationally were worried about COVID. And there was enough noise around it at that time for kind of everyone to be thinking about it in certain areas of the country. And so practices were using OMD to basically, patients would show up for an appointment. The practice would have a sign up that says, hey, text us when you're here and go back to your car, and we'll triage you from there. And so we gave them a really good platform for managing those conversations. And within 2 weeks of having some of those conversations, we had launched video and really built a simple way to connect patients with their practices. And it hasn't just been COVID. Yeah, we learned a lot really quickly.
Amazing.
But one other use case from this year that we never would have imagined was the wildfires in California and Oregon and Washington, where difficult to reach patients, difficult to communicate with community, with members of the community for the purposes of healthcare. And so we've been used for kind of outreach to patients that are in those challenging situations and figuring out how to triage them, mostly through text messaging and video. So it's been an interesting year, and I think the most unpredictable part of it is, how do doctors and practices get reimbursed, and how do they pay their own bills as their patients have fluctuated in and out. So it's been a crazy few months, but we've been in a great position to help solve some really important problems.
So how did you scale up with this sudden change?
Not always gracefully, but luckily we had scaled to a certain extent before that, and everything's in the cloud, so we just had to kind of quickly adapt and throw money at Amazon Web Services, add more servers, Our team doubled, almost tripled in size. So we were hiring people left and right to help kind of scale from a personnel perspective. But technology-wise, we had a few rough weeks in there.
Wow.
We survived it.
So does everybody in your company work from home, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so we were working out of VSET, and then as we went home, I think first week of March, we hired people from around the country because people were getting laid off from companies that it was a perfect parallel with what we do, just in companies that were larger and were laying people off.
Interesting.
And so we hired people from around the country, and we're all working from home now, and just managing that pretty well.
Well, thank you. God, that's extraordinary. So how many people work in your company now?
So we have about 15 now. I think in January we had 6.
Wow.
And so it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. Well, congratulations to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. And next we have Burlington Code Academy, the co-founders Alex Horner and Ben Boas.
Hi, Congressman Welch. Pleasure to meet
Hi.
you.
Yeah.
Hi there, I'm Alex Horner.
Yeah. Hey, Alex.
So we started a company called Burlington Code Academy. It's not Burlington Coat Factory. It's just sound. So yeah, Burlington Code Academy trains adults into tech employment in a very short period of time. So, rather than going back to a 4-year degree or going through a continuing ed department, somebody would come to Burlington Code Academy who wants a complete career switch into coding or UX design, and we would train them 12 weeks into those specific careers. The reason it works is because there's, first, there's a lot of demand for coders and software engineers and designers. And also because these are very technical skills, right? So they're almost more like trade skills in a lot of ways. We started the company in 2017, moved back from New York to our parents' home in lovely Proctor, Vermont, and built the company, just the two of us for a little while. We had a third co-founder, and then we had some help from VSET to sort of put us on the right track. This year was really interesting for us. With COVID-19, we experienced at first a little bit of a scare, but it turned out to be the pandemic turned out to be quite favorable to the training economy, specifically because, there are economists that estimate that about 40% of the jobs that have been wiped out from COVID, specifically in retail and hospitality. I'm sorry, Stacy, but a lot of economists estimate that about 40% of these jobs, they're just never going to come back. And they think that is because it's not necessarily that these industries are collapsing, and retail will come back, hospitality will come back, but not in the same way. What's happened is automation has increased significantly every month since COVID for a few reasons. One, because it requires less face-to-face employees when you have more automated work, less manual labor, and also because it helps businesses pad their bottom line. So for that reason, we do now see 30 million unemployed Americans, but there's a really big opportunity in tech employment to put Americans back to work. Microsoft's data team recently produced a report stating that about 13 million new tech jobs will be coming to the U.S. Employment market in the next 4 to 5 years.
13 million?
13 million, yep.
Wow.
With the vast majority of those being in software development. That's compared to the 149 million globally, actually. So, and globally, 96 million of those are going to be in software development. So, big opportunity to put a lot of Americans who don't have jobs back to work. So when COVID first crept in, we had a little bit of a scare because we were in the middle of a cohort, which is how we classify our classes. It's our binomial nomenclature. And we had a few students who were a little bit shaken up by some of the economic ramifications and decided to leave the company or leave our course. So we thought that after that we'd see a bigger drop off, but a few months into it, we actually saw a 275% increase in.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So how do you teach when we've got to keep socially distant?
Well, so we last year we took a bit of money into the company through investment, and we put about half of that into building a learning management system. So we were already planning to do online, push that we've been going for about a year, and then once COVID struck, we were like I said, right in the middle of a course, and we just switched it all to online using Zoom. Discord, and all of our learning material just so happened to be on software that we've already built. So it was it pushed us to build it a little quicker, but it was right time, right place. And now we've pivoted to only doing online. We're actually not going to be returning to in-person courses. With the online market for what we do grew by 171% before COVID, so 2018 to 2019, and the market for the same type of education only grew by 33% that year. So there's already a really big, just in terms of like the growth of the market, there's already a pretty significant reason for us to go online. So that's what we do now, and for our growth, what we've been really focusing on as far as market expansion is concerned is more of the tertiary and secondary cities that are underserved, similar to Burlington, where you have colleges and universities, but they're a little bit too small for the big players to go into. Those turn out to be really great markets for us. And so, right now we're focusing on Portland, Maine, a little bit, Dover, Delaware, and that's sort of where we're pushing our online student customer acquisition.
God, that's cool.
Yep.
Good for you. That's amazing.
So just to go off of that a little bit, we also have a 90% placement rate. So 90% of the graduates coming from our program are getting tech jobs, and their average starting salary is $60,000 a year. So that's about double the median.
That's astonishing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's really remarkable. So what are the ages of people who use your service?
So interestingly enough, we always get at the amount of times we've had parents ask us whether we could take their kids in. Maybe I should start a day school for children, but we don't teach kids. Nobody under the age of 18. It's 18 up. The majority of our students are between 28 to 32. A lot of them have some work experience, because these we call them boot camps. These courses are like boot camps, right? They're really intense, and they're Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Their students are working like 70 hours a week.
So it is people on the younger side who may have been in a different career, but have some familiarity, with
exactly
the internet. Yeah. Okay.
And maybe no familiarity with the internet, but they at least have some fire under their feet, mostly because they've had enough time to work in a field and realize they hate their job and think. Right,
but it's on the younger side. It's not like people whose coal miners whose coal mines have shut down, that type of thing. It's people that are in that generation where they have a familiarity with the computers and are not intimidated, but they want to change a career. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Benny and Alex.
Thank you.
So we're just going to open this up to have a conversation with Congressman Welch, and if anyone wants to share kind of their story or ask a question, I'm sure he'd be more than willing to provide some answers. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it can be about anything too. Go ahead.
Hey, Congressman Welch, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, call me Peter. You'll make me nervous.
All right.
Thank you.
Peter. So my name is Jeremy Holtzman. I was a part of ESET for a little while before COVID. Now I just take advantage of all their amazing resources that they share with me. Recently, I've been working on a company that helps local and state Democratic candidates in their campaigns. And we've worked with a few representatives in North Carolina that are running for state house. But one of the big issues that we're working on is researching what issues are what issues candidates are focusing on their elections.
Mhm.
And just wondering from your perspective, how much of the issues come from you and your campaign figuring out what is important for you to run on versus what you're hearing from voters and, from public sentiment?
Well, we all live in the same sort of environment. But, for me, the issues are really reflective of, I think, what's on Vermonters' minds, like climate change. I mean, first of all, right now, there's one issue, and it's get rid of Trump. Okay. I mean, I'm talking partisan here, but that's what's on. This is, in the next 3 weeks, there's only one thing. It's not about what the Biden plan is on A, B, C, or D. Okay. Because we've had these 4 years, and fundamental question for Americans to decide is whether they want to change or they want 4 more years. So we don't need a poll. We don't need to check with people. I mean, that's just what is the dominant question for all of America. But then on the issues, the issues, I think, they're always sort of reflective of your own orientation as a person who grew up and becomes an adult. And, for me, the things that I care about are like climate change, obviously, income inequality, broadband development for economic opportunity. They're broad categories of issues where you don't necessarily need polling, or even they're in the ether. You know what I mean? It's just what we think about. But then where it gets more specific is how do you talk about that, and how do you listen, and how do you come up with something that is concrete manifestation of what you want for the issue, but can be tangible enough that people can see that there's a connection between your advocacy for climate change, let's say, and an implementation proposal you're making to have it in. Like on climate change, a lot of people like a carbon tax, okay? But that would be an example of how do you go from the broad concept of climate change to a practical solution. And that's where it's a combination of listening to the policy people who write, polling, and probably some of the stuff you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Is anyone else going? I'll
go ahead.
Question. Hi, my name is Marina McCoy. I own a small company called Waste Free Earth here in Burlington, Vermont.
Yeah.
And my question has to do with housing. So obviously it's a pretty cool thing that people are moving to Vermont due to that they don't have to live in the cities for remote work, for their work anymore, since they could work remotely. But since housing prices were already pretty high in Vermont, and now that we have more people coming in that have a higher pay rate, but not for the current Vermonters, and there's not many livable wage jobs here. So what is Vermont going to do to make sure that the Vermonters that are here can stay here instead of getting pushed out?
Well, what an incredibly important question. Housing is brutal, as you guys know. Anybody in Burlington, a lot of you are up there. It just skyrockets, and it's going up a lot now because, as you say, some folks from pretty high-priced real estate markets can sell their house, and they can come up here and look at a place on a Zoom call and buy it, sight unseen, other than over the internet. So, frankly, the way we've approached housing before at the federal level is that there have been low-income tax credits, there's been historic tax credits, there have been a variety of devices that help make the numbers work for a developer. And in many cases, the developer is like the Burlington Housing Trust or the Champlain Housing Trust. But we're really, I think, at a point where there's really going to have to be much more focus on some of the intentionality of where do you locate and how do you build housing. I'll give you an example. It's not in our state, but there's a lot of movement in California, for instance, to address zoning issues that keep housing from being built in more dense ways around metro stations. Which is obviously, it makes sense. If you're going to work and you got to take the metro or the the BART out there. Should you have housing there? And zoning laws obviously really make a difference on what the ultimate cost of development is. In Vermont, there's a lot of discussion now about the permitting process and how you can make it adjusted so that you encourage some density and bring down the cost per unit of housing. But you've asked a question that is everyone's asking, and it's pretty hard to answer, but it has to be answered in order for workers to be able to afford to live here. Now, what's your company?
So it's called Waste Free Earth, and we
Yeah.
help implement zero waste strategies with companies ranging from small scale businesses to larger companies. But we were
That's
primarily in the event sector. So we did events all across the United States, setting up sustainability programs and zero waste systems, and got wiped out pretty hard with the pandemic. We
Oh
lost
my
all
God!
our
Yeah,
clients.
no, that'd be unbelievable. I mean, that and that's the area it'll be last to return. You know, it's the hospitality sector, the performance sector. You know, nonprofit places like the Flynn, where they depend on ticket revenue as well as contributions, but where it's crowds have to be there in order to support the event. So yeah, that's hard. So good luck, but that's important what you're doing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Marina.
I had a question, Peter.
Yeah.
Have you thought about promoting what we'll call second purpose COVID technologies? You know, Ben had a perfect example about how his investment, on an online remote learning platform really benefited him.
Right.
And probably, he wasn't thinking about COVID. He just knew that that's the way it was going. And those investments were critical into bringing that to fruition faster. My company, Smart Resource Labs, we've been in energy management systems and IoTs for decades. People have been talking about resilient buildings and healthy buildings, and it's always been something we want to attain. But now
Right.
COVID is really making people appreciate ASHRAE standards for ventilation and other things.
Right.
So, just kind of as a comment, but then asking how you could do it would be, how can we get ahead with our technologies here? COVID is going to force us to make those investments and improvements, but instead of these being kind of throwaway investments, because hopefully COVID in the next couple of years will subside, how do these now transform into what they really were aimed to be in the first place?
Well, I frankly think you'd be able to answer that better than me. Because, the question for me as a member of Congress is what policies facilitate the efforts of entrepreneurs like you to bring it home. Okay. Now, the ventilation obviously is hyper important because of COVID. I mean, that one of the claims the airline industry makes is that they really do have very good systems and it's safe. And actually, I haven't seen that contradicted a lot, but that's true in buildings. But it's also true that there's a benefit to good ventilation systems with or without COVID. I mean, it's just cleaner air that you're breathing. So, our focus in DC is primarily in the aid. It is really about what do we have to do policy-wise to bring down the infection rate and get on top of it, and what do we have to do to stabilize the economy so that when we get to the other side of COVID, as many businesses and enterprises can come with us and not be sunk. But it's not to try to determine what specific things for delivery will be best suited to address COVID. I mean, other obviously than the vaccine and the ventilators and some of the healthcare equipment. But what I think is happening, I mean, just think what we just heard about the texting and the communication system. Necessity is the mother of invention. So there are things that are happening in response to COVID because the demand and the need is there that have collateral benefits that are going to outlive COVID.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Peter's got a question.
Thanks, David. And hi, Congressman. My name is
Hi.
also Peter Zoshev. So I just wanted to riff on Marina's question for a moment. So I have a project that's been putzing along for quite a while now, but I did finally get an LLC, I think in April of this year. So born in these more difficult times. It's converging into an educational startup, so developing protocols for training and testing kind of lower levels of cognition, let's say more base functions like working memory. But I also wanted to mention I'm on the board at Pathways Vermont, which I know you're familiar with, having spoken at the breakfast last year.
That's great.
And so I'm very passionate about the work that they do on the housing side, but especially on the mental health care side as well. And so I'm involved various advocacy efforts. And so I wanted to ask you, from someone in your position, that has a pulse on, I guess, the attention span or the attention, not necessarily like the bandwidth, but where it is in the political sphere, when it comes to advocacy work done by these kinds of organization. What
you mean
are
like
people?
Pathways?
Yeah, like Pathways. For someone like myself, right? What kind of messages, what kind of data, do we need to kind of help drive some of the message for the need or for like the efficacy that that politicians, whether at the state or more federal level, would be receptive to?
Oh, I see. Well, you come up with the data analytics. You can, again, you can figure that out better than I can. But obviously, anything that is data driven that demonstrates that the money's well spent and has better outcomes than before helps us. How to design that, I really defer to people who are better at that than I am. But the question of it, there's a lot of support within Congress about what I would think are the obvious benefits of people in home or in a setting like the Pathways situation, where some of those social and mental health needs can be provided there. There's an integration to a person's life when they can get some of these services really close by or right in the location. The big debate in Congress is whether that's a role the government should play. Should it provide money to help with those programs? And my view obviously is that it should. Mitch McConnell, his view is that it shouldn't. It's just you're on your own. So the big part of the debate there isn't the efficacy of it, because we could have a Pathways program here in Vermont, but there could be one in the reddest part of Texas or the reddest part of Nebraska. And if I'm talking to a colleague who represents that area and he or she is a conservative Republican, when you talk specifically about the benefit of people they represent who are in a location where there is a Pathways style program, they get it. You know what I mean? When you get past the ideological and into the practical, my goodness, it sells itself. So I think a bigger part of this is this sort of macro debate that is just ongoing about what's the role of government, and does it play a role in providing essentially taxpayer dollars to support projects like the Pathways project.
Okay, great. Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear you say that, because next week we're speaking to some folks in Santa Donna County in New Mexico, the idea of helping them kind of kickstart their own version. So that more grassroots approach.
Well, it is, and see, it's empowering. It's interesting. Today, the more we can do to localize things, and the interesting thing with the internet is that it's global, but on the other hand, it can be used as a tool that really helps localization. I'll just give an example. When I just came back from the food bank, and I was there, with representatives from Bernie and Patrick's office, because the Department of Agriculture just ended a contract to deliver meals. It was run by a local company, the Abbey Group, okay? And you had a partnership where the food bank was boxing the meals, the Abbey Group was delivering them, and they were able to deliver them to the last mile. And they were buying food from local farmers to put in the boxes, all right? So they had this capacity, because it was local, to deal with the complicated logistics of getting food produced by local farmers into the program, and then getting that food box not just to the end of the road, but to the house where the kids were, right? Well, the Department of Agriculture just ended that contract, and they're giving it to Cisco, which is a $60 billion company. They can't move food unless there's 9 or 18 pallets. There's no place to store that in a lot of locations around. So in the name of efficiency, there was probably a slightly better price. You really sacrifice resilience and effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what you're doing and advocating about is bringing those resources down very, very locally, and taking advantage of the capacity of local people to struggle with those logistical and practical implementation challenges. But it's done with some awareness that, hey, these folks know better and have a deep commitment to the community. So hang in there.
All right, thank you.
Congressman, I have a question. You're on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, I believe.
Right.
You know, Facebook, Amazon, Google, antitrust. What are your views? Are they too big to exist nowadays?
Well, they are. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, there's a growing sense of awareness that these companies are part of what has become a problem. And when I first went to Congress, they were big and getting bigger and bigger, and there was almost universal praise. But now a couple of things are happening. Number one, the whole, just in politics and in public communication, there's just a growing apprehension about all the disinformation that just floods places like Facebook. You know, it's like a river of lies when it comes to the public domain. And also, it's very clear that the business model of some of these social media agencies is in fact facilitated by negativity and attacks in conspiracy theories. So I'm not quite sure we know what the answer is, but it's not to continue thinking that Facebook is just an unalloyed good thing. The second thing is the size. And this is something that people on this call, I think, would be concerned about. You know, there's a lot of evidence in this antitrust report that just came out from the House Judiciary Committee that my friend David Cicilline was the leader of, that there's some anti-competitive, depending on how you define anti-competitive practices by some of the big companies to essentially buy up rivals before they can be, quote, a threat to compete with them, because they've come up with a more innovative approach. And you know, that's more and more economists are seeing that that's a challenge. So you've got the dominance of these big companies, and then even when there's a potential for another garage startup to move into an area that provides competition, if they get bought up and then suddenly they don't exist anymore, then the whole competitive issue and the whole innovation issue get shrunk. So we're a long way from the answer, but those questions were not asked 10 years ago when I early in my congressional career.
Thank you.
I mean, I'd be interested in what you guys think about that, because you're on, a few of you are on your way to being Google and Facebook, but none of you have made it quite yet.
I've heard the argument that, you know, and I'm not saying that I side with this, but I've heard the argument that having potential targets like getting acquired or getting bought by a company, or having potential opportunities to work within a company to bring innovation is what has driven a lot of small businesses and startups generally in the US. So, I mean, I do think that they do I think these companies do participate in anti-competitive behavior, but for other reasons. Mainly being that there's a monopolization on targeting and in human data. And so for that reason, I think that there definitely is, there's definitely some fishy business there. But as far as, getting either bought or swallowed is concerned, I think there's an argument to be made for why that has its advantages as well for the U.S. economy. But.
Thank you.
And I would like to chime in on that. I'm in the energy side, and a startup with no balance sheet can't get any significant jobs, because, it's not anti-competitive. It's just, how fast things are going in combating climate change, and, integrating utility scale batteries and all these things are very capital intensive projects. There's a lot of innovation that exists in Vermont. And I think, potentially even getting acquired and growing offices here, maybe a way to be more competitive as a country, especially in things like battling climate change. It's a all-in kind of thing. So how do you make it? I understand what you're saying, and how do you make it so it's not anti-competitive? But, at that level, is it what makes us competitive is something also to think about. Especially, for us in Vermont, where very few of us have big balance sheets, but can really contribute and have impact by partnering with those who do.
That's good.
I'd like to chime in too, if I might.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. So I have an apps business. So I sell apps to help people learn languages. Now there used to be a healthy ecosystem of app stores back 10 years ago, pre-Apple. And then Apple came along and said, no more app stores except ours. And we're going to charge 30% markup on everything that flows through our store. So, that would be like if General Motors said, nobody can sell tires for our cars except us, or oil, or spark plugs, or anything. Everything has to flow through the General Motors store, and we're just going to charge 30%, arbitrary markup. So I don't know if that's something you talk about, but that's a good start.
No, it is.
Angle to go after Apple.
I think that's right. That's exactly right. You're stuck. You don't really have an option. And that's the product tying to some extent. So these are new issues that they probably, if we look back, were inevitable, because size begets size, and then the company that has the big size uses whatever advantage you can to maximize its profits. But that, I think, is a good example. You got to go through the the App Store, and they just take a cut.
But aren't there already antitrust laws that specifically pertain to that? I mean, you cited one, binding or bundling or things like that. Aren't there already laws to stop a company from?
Antitrust cases, there is the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was like 1906, and the Trust Busters started with breaking up Standard Oil. I mean, it was a huge event, but there's now a real debate about antitrust theory, and the basic antitrust theory that the Trump administration has been following, and some prior Democratic administrations, is that unless you can demonstrate that the cost to the consumer as a result of the anti-competitive behavior is greater, then there's no such thing as antitrust. And of course, in the internet model, you get Gmail for free, right? But in exchange for your data, that's the price you're paying. And the emerging question in antitrust is whether there should be another factor, and that is, does it stifle competition? In other words, it's tough to show the price has gone up. I think that the Apple Store, the App Store may be different. Okay, so I don't know the particulars of how the antitrust theory applies to that. But there is growing support for a different definition of antitrust that talks about how if it stifles competition, even if you can't demonstrate higher costs, then that's a factor that should be taken into account, whether anti-competitive measures should be, or remedies should be assessed against some of these big companies.
Thanks.
Hey, Peter, I have actually a fun question I've been wanting to ask you for about a year now. So in the impeachment hearings, mid-November, you had a viral moment, so much so that my dad texted me immediately, and I might have even texted Dave, like, hey, did you just see that? And for those of you who don't remember, I think it was Jim Jordan who said, Congress will never get a chance to question the one who, quote, started it all.
Right.
And you said President Trump can have a seat right here whenever he's ready, or something along those lines. Did you have that plan? Because that was amazing. I need to know.
I did not have it planned. You can't plan those things, okay? And there's two things. First of all, I just happened to be the next one up to question after Jordan finished his rant, okay? But as Jim was doing it, he's a classmate of mine. I've known him forever. And he's a pretty wild guy. And when he was saying that and going on that tear, it came to me what the contradiction was, which is what I pointed out, that the person who knew about the whole beginning was Trump, right?
Yeah.
So I was just sitting there, and it came to me what I'd say as the proper response, as it would have probably to many of you if you just happened to be sitting in my chair at that moment after Jim Jordan finished. But I remember talking to Adam Schiff after, because sometimes, the chair of our committee, and Adam is the chair, will either go right to me or he might interject something, right, and interrupt the flow. And I said, Adam, I was so nervous because I just saw Jim throw me this high hanging, slow curveball that was coming into me. And I was just just holding onto my bat. I didn't want to swing too soon. And then I thought, oh no, Schiff may interrupt and stop the pitch midway. And I said, and you didn't. So I was thinking about it when the words went out of Jim's mouth, but there was nothing pre-planned. But I was terrified that I wouldn't get the pitch or that I'd swing too soon. But
that was amazing.
It did come off. That was funny.
Yeah, no, that was the question. I think immediately I was talking to everyone else about, like, there's no way you could have planned that. There's too much going on. But anyway, thank you so much for answering that question. Yeah. That's something I've done for a while.
Yeah, well, it's really good to be with you guys. I see we're kind of at our time, but I really admire you. I just, it's so kind of thrilling for me to be talking with all of you who just are in this different world of technology and seeing how practical and organic it's becoming in constructive ways in our lives. It's really kind of thrilling. And then I hear 13 million new tech jobs. I mean, it's really, amazing. It gives me hope for the future. So thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think Stas has a quick question. If you don't mind staying on for a few more minutes.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Thanks again for the presentation and your time, Mr. Welch. I have a question with regards to call it the Green New Deal, or any legislation that is going to point us in the right direction. And I'm going to admit to self-interest. I'm in renewable energies and clean mobility, as most people at VSET know. In the 2016 election, there was a big deal made out of the jobs that would be lost in areas where coal was being mined and coal plants are being closed. Do you feel that there could be greater clarity for those people in those towns, in those small cities that will be most affected by a transition towards cleaner mobility and cleaner energy, of the job influxes, of the jobs will be created where they live, so that they don't have to move to California or other high, priority places? Go ahead.
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, let me tell you just a quick story. But I have a friend who's a Republican member of Congress, serves with me on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he is from West Virginia coal country. And he is incredibly good ally of mine on renewable energy projects and also on energy efficiency. But he is defending coal country jobs, and he's against the EPA, and he's for coal and all of that. So and what I realize is that if you're the congressman from coal country, it's like being the congressman from Vermont. You know, you're going to help dairy if you can, right? And I said, David, his name is David McKinley, you know, I would love to meet your coal workers. So he invited me to come down to West Virginia, and I went down, and we went into a coal mine. Went down 1,100 feet, and then got on one of those coal cars and drove. You ride about 3 miles an hour, 5 miles in, and then I spent the afternoon down there on a coal seam with the coal workers cutting coal. And we came out, we had dinner, and it was pretty moving for me in the sense that you meet these people. They didn't cause climate change, right? These are like salt of the earth folks. The only people, I said to them, who I know that work harder than you are dairy farmers, okay? And in that community, when we were having our meal, it was a Friday. They all go to the high school football games on Friday night. 6 years before I got there, they used to have 8 high schools, and now they have 2. And it tells you what's happening in that community. And then the next day, there was a big meeting of the UAW because they were protesting losing their healthcare benefits, where these companies would promise them lifetime healthcare, and that's an incredibly hazardous job, as you know. And the companies would go through this dance where they declare bankruptcy, offload their responsibilities, and then incorporate under a new name. It was outrageous. So I became a champion with David McKinley of restoring their healthcare benefits. And when I was talking to them, I said, you know, I come from Vermont, the Green Mountain State. I said, we don't have coal mines, but we have electricity. And thank you guys, all of you, for keeping the lights on in our barns and our schools for all those years. But we got to make a change. And it's not because we don't respect your work, it's because we've got to make a change. So first and foremost, on the Green New Deal or any other legislation, we've got to reach out and acknowledge that we have a debt of gratitude to those workers. We have an obligation to those workers. I believe that. And I believe that those of us who are absolutely the most passionate about eliminating carbon emissions have to be the most passionate about helping folks who are going to be affected adversely by the transition. And I also think we have to acknowledge that there is an impact. It's not just going to be easy. It's why I was asking the coding school. It's not easy for coal miners to come out of the mine and go to the coding school. All right. It'd be like for me to go to the coding school. It's just not there. So, and we can show, I think, that there will be new jobs, but we also have to acknowledge that there's got to be some direct support for folks who are impacted because of the transition. And I'm so glad you asked that, because I just think it's existential for us to address what's happening as a result of carbon emissions. But we do not have the high moral ground over people whose lives for generations have been going deep into the mines and getting sick and having the mines collapse and having a way of life that they value and is important. So that has to be right at the forefront of our advocacy, that we're for those workers, not necessarily the coal company operators. They've done some really bad stuff, but those workers, no, they're good folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is so insightful, Peter. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap us up just because we're out of time, but just a reminder that this Lunch and Learn was sponsored by CWE. CWE provides opportunities for women entrepreneurs and women in business to increase professional services, personal growth, and financial independence. So we're super grateful to them and to you, Peter, and to everyone who joined on the call. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, you guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Peter.
Yeah, bye-bye, Phoebe.